The courtroom smelled of dust and desperation. Eleanor Hartwell stood before Judge Morrison with her hands trembling, the bruises on her wrists still purple from her father's last rage. Her crime? Refusing to marry the wealthy cattle baron her father had chosen, a man 40 years her senior, with a reputation for cruelty that made even hardened cowboys look away. "Miss Hartwell," the judge's voice thundered through the sparse Montana courthouse, "you have two choices. Return to your father's custody and honor the arrangement he's made, or I'll assign you to marry someone more suitable to your rebellious nature." Before she could answer, her father's voice cut through the air like a whip. "She's cost me a fortune in broken promises, Your Honor. Let her marry a pauper and learn what real hardship is." If you're enjoying this story, I'd truly appreciate if you could take a moment to subscribe to the From Wild West channel and leave a like on this video. It really helps us bring you more quality content like this. I'd also love to know, where are you listening from today? The judge's gavel struck. So be it. There's a homesteader outside town. Came in last week looking for a wife to help work his claim. Name's Thomas Reed. Miss Hartwell, you'll marry him by week's end, or you'll face charges of defying a court order. Eleanor's world tilted. She'd heard that name, whispered in town, as the man who'd lost everything in a fire last winter. They said he lived in a half-built cabin with nothing but debts and determination. 3 days later, she stood in that same courthouse in a borrowed dress, facing a man who looked carved from the mountains themselves. Thomas Reed was tall and broad-shouldered, his hands scarred from labor, his dark eyes holding a weariness that matched her own. He couldn't have been more than 30, but life had aged him in ways that mattered. "I won't hurt you," were his first words after the judge pronounced them married. Not a greeting, not a smile, just a promise delivered in a voice rough as river stones. They rode in silence to his property, Eleanor clinging to the wagon seat as it bounced over rutted trails. When they arrived, her heart sank. The cabin was barely a single cow grazed in a patchy field. This was poverty that made her father's threats seem like prophecy. Thomas helped her down, his hands careful despite their calluses. "I know it's not much. I know you were forced into this." He looked at her directly, and she saw something unexpected in those dark eyes: respect. "But while you're here, you're not property. You're a person, and I see a woman worth treating with dignity." Eleanor's throat tightened. In 22 years, no man had ever said such words to her. That first week, she learned the rhythms of frontier survival. Thomas worked from dawn until dark, rebuilding what the fire had destroyed. She cooked meager meals over the fireplace, mended his worn clothes, and tried not to think about the comfortable prison she'd escaped. He never touched her beyond practical necessity, never demanded anything, and slept on the floor while she took the only bed. "You don't have to do that," she said on the 5th night, guilt gnawing at her. "Yes, I do." He didn't look up from the harness he was repairing. "You didn't choose this marriage. I won't take anything you haven't freely given." The words settled into her chest like warmth from a fire. Slowly, carefully, they began to build something fragile between them. Thomas taught her to ride his old mare, his hands steadying her in the saddle until she found her balance. She started a small garden, coaxing vegetables from the stubborn soil. In the evenings, they'd sit on the porch, still distant, but less alone. "Why'd you agree to this?" Eleanor asked one night, watching the sun paint the mountains gold. "Taking a wife you never met?" Thomas was quiet for so long she thought he wouldn't answer. Lost my first wife and baby daughter in that fire. Made a promise I'd never love again, never risk that pain. He stared at his scarred hands. But a man can't work a claim alone. Thought maybe we could help each other survive, nothing more. Eleanor understood that kind of grief. My mother died when I was 12. My father, he blamed me, said I reminded him too much of her. Everything I did was wrong. Every word I spoke was defiance. She touched her wrist absently. The bruises were just his way of correcting me. Thomas's jaw tightened. He ever comes here, he'll regret it. The promise in those words made her feel safer than she'd felt in years. Summer deepened, and so did the small intimacies between them. Thomas brought her wildflowers from the high meadow, simple gestures that meant everything. Eleanor started leaving his coffee the way he liked it, learned to anticipate what he needed before he asked. They worked side by side, their movements synchronizing like a dance neither had planned. One afternoon, while Thomas was repairing the barn roof, Eleanor heard his sharp cry. She ran outside to find him on the ground, blood streaming from a gash on his arm where he'd fallen against a broken beam. "It's nothing," he gritted out, trying to stand. "Sit down before you fall down." Eleanor's voice was firm as she helped him to the porch. She cleaned the wound with hands that only shook slightly, remembering the nursing skills her mother had taught her. "This needs stitching." "Go slow," Thomas said through clenched teeth as she worked. "It hurts. I'll die before I hurt you more than necessary." The words came out fierce, protective. When had this man become someone she cared about? Their eyes met, and something shifted, like a door opening in both their hearts simultaneously. Thomas lifted his good hand, hesitated, then carefully tucked a strand of hair behind her ear. "You're stronger than you think, Eleanor. Only because you showed me I could be." The summer heat pressed down as they sat there, his blood on her hands, her heart hammering against her ribs. Thomas leaned forward slowly, giving her every chance to pull away. When his lips met hers, it was gentle, a question more than a claim. Eleanor answered by kissing him back, tasting salt and something sweeter. Possibility. They pulled apart, both breathing hard. "I didn't mean," Thomas started. "I wanted you to," Eleanor interrupted. "I've wanted you to for weeks." His hand cupped her face. "This can't be just loneliness talking. I need you to be sure. I'm sure I feel safer with you than I've ever felt. I'm sure I admire your strength and your kindness. I'm sure that somewhere between the judge's order and now, this stopped being a sentence and started being a choice." Thomas pulled her close, careful of his injured arm, and Eleanor let herself be held. For the first time since her mother died, she felt like she'd come home. But peace in the Montana Territory was always temporary. 2 weeks later, Eleanor was gathering eggs when she heard horses. Her blood turned cold at the sight of her father's distinctive black stallion, flanked by 2 ranch hands and the cattle baron she'd been meant to marry, Marcus Blackwood, his face twisted with rage. "Eleanor!" her father's voice boomed. "Judge Morrison was wrong to interfere. You're coming home to honor your obligations." Thomas emerged from the barn, his eyes meeting Eleanor's with a silent plea, positioning himself between Eleanor and the riders. "She's my wife now, legally bound. You've got no claim here," Blackwood sneered. "Wife to a pauper with nothing but dirt and debts? Eleanor, come with me, and I'll forgive this embarrassment. You'll have everything money can buy." "I already have everything I need," Eleanor said, her voice steady as she moved to stand beside Thomas. "I have my freedom. I have my dignity. I have a man who sees me as an equal." "You ungrateful!" Her father lunged forward, but Thomas was faster. "Touch her, and you'll regret it." Thomas's hand rested on the rifle by the door. "This is my land, and she's under my protection. Leave, now." "This isn't over," Blackwood threatened. "A man like you can't protect anything." "We'll be back." They rode off in a cloud of dust. But Thomas knew better than to relax. "They'll come at night," he said quietly. "Men like that don't give up." He was right. 3 nights later, Eleanor woke to the smell of smoke. Flames were already licking up the side of the barn, a deliberate fire set to drive them out. Thomas was already moving, grabbing buckets. "Get the mare out!" he shouted. Eleanor ran to the barn, her heart pounding. The cow was already loose, but the mare was panicking in her stall, eyes rolling white. Eleanor forced herself to move calmly, speaking soft words even as smoke burned her lungs. She got the halter on, led the horse out, and saw 3 figures near the cabin, Blackwood and the ranch hands, waiting like vultures. "Thomas!" she screamed. He turned from fighting the fire, saw the ambush, and ran toward her. Blackwood raised his rifle. Eleanor didn't think. She grabbed the shovel leaning against the fence and swung with every ounce of strength she possessed. The blade connected with Blackwood's arm just as he fired, sending the shot wild. The rifle clattered to the ground. Thomas reached them, his fist connecting with the nearest ranch hand's jaw. The fight was brutal and brief. 2 against 3 became 1 against 3, as Eleanor held her own with the shovel. Fear transformed into fury. When the local sheriff arrived, alerted by a neighbor who'd seen the smoke, he found Blackwood and his men tied up, Thomas bleeding from a bullet graze on his shoulder, and Eleanor standing guard with the rifle. Self-defense, the sheriff ruled after hearing the whole story, and attempted arson, assault, and violating a court-ordered marriage. Your father and Blackwood will be facing charges, Mrs. Reed. Mrs. Reed, the name settled around Eleanor like a blessing. Later, as she cleaned Thomas's wound by lamplight in their smoke-damaged cabin, her hands were gentle but sure. "You saved my life tonight," Thomas said, wonder in his voice. "Together," Eleanor replied, using the word that had become their anchor. "We saved each other." Thomas caught her hand, pressed it to his heart. "I broke my promise. I love you, Eleanor. Completely. Terrifyingly. I love you." Tears spilled down her cheeks. "I love you too. I think I have since you first told me I was a person worth dignity." He kissed her then, not gentle this time, but fierce with the knowledge of how close they'd come to losing everything. Eleanor kissed him back with equal passion, her fingers tangling in his hair, her body pressed against his as if she could merge their souls through sheer will. "I want this marriage to be real," she whispered against his lips. "Not just on paper, in every way." Thomas pulled back just enough to look at her, his dark eyes searching hers. "Are you certain? Because I've never been more certain of anything." Eleanor's voice was clear, strong. "You've given me everything that matters. Let me give myself to you freely." That night, in their small cabin still smelling of smoke and survival, they became husband and wife in truth. Thomas was patient and reverent, treating her body like sacred ground. Eleanor discovered that intimacy without fear was a revelation, that being touched with love transformed everything. Afterwards, wrapped in Thomas's arms, listening to his heartbeat steady beneath her ear, Eleanor understood what the judge had unknowingly given her. Not punishment, not poverty, but the richest gift imaginable, a man whose wealth couldn't be measured in gold. The morning after the fire brought a cruel reality. In daylight, The damage was worse than they'd thought. Half the barn had collapsed. Their winter hay stores were ash, and 3 fence lines were destroyed. Thomas stood, surveying the wreckage, his jaw tight with worry Eleanor had never seen before. "We can rebuild," she said, trying to sound confident. "With what?" Thomas's voice was raw. "I spent everything I had on lumber for the barn the first time. The bank won't loan to a homesteader who's already mortgaged to the hilt." He turned to her, and she saw something that frightened her more than Blackwood ever had: defeat creeping into those steady eyes. "Eleanor, I can't provide for you. Maybe your father was right. Maybe you deserve better than this." "Don't." Eleanor grabbed his face, forcing him to look at her. "Don't you dare finish that sentence. We'll find a way." But finding a way proved harder than either expected. The first blow came 3 days later, when Eleanor went to town for supplies. Mrs. Henderson at the general store, usually friendly, wouldn't meet her eyes. "I'm sorry, Mrs. Reed, but I can't extend you credit. My husband says, well, with the fire and all the trouble with Mr. Blackwood, people are saying your husband can't protect his property, can't protect his wife. That makes you both bad risks." Eleanor's cheeks burned. "We'll pay cash then. I'm afraid we're out of most items you'd need." Mrs. Henderson's tone made it clear this was a lie. At the next store, the same reception, and the next. Word had spread faster than the fire itself. The Reeds were pariahs, tainted by association with scandal and violence. It didn't matter that they'd been the victims. In a town where reputation was currency, they were bankrupt. Eleanor returned to the ranch with an empty wagon and a heavy heart. She found Thomas trying to salvage charred beams, his movements mechanical, defeated. "They won't sell to us," she said quietly. Thomas's hammer stilled. For a long moment, he didn't move. Then he threw the tool so hard it embedded in a post. "This is my fault. I brought you into this mess, made you a target. We're in this together, remember?" Eleanor's voice shook but held firm. "So we figure it out together." That night, they sat at their scarred kitchen table, counting their remaining money. $12.37. Not enough to rebuild. Not enough to buy seed for spring planting. Barely enough to survive the winter. "I could take work at the lumber mill in Bozeman," Thomas said, the words clearly costing him. "It's 3 weeks away, but they paid decent wages. I could send money back." "Absolutely not." Eleanor's tone was sharp. "You leave, and they'll say you abandoned your claim. The bank will foreclose, and we'll lose everything. Besides, I won't spend months alone after just—" She stopped, her hand instinctively moving to her stomach. Thomas caught the gesture. "After just what?" Eleanor met his eyes, fear and hope warring in her chest. "I think I might be pregnant. It's too early to be certain, but I'm late, and I've been feeling strange in the mornings." Thomas's face went pale. Eleanor, a baby, in this situation, with no money, no supplies. He stood abruptly, pacing. "This is exactly what I feared. I can't protect you, can't provide for you. Now there might be a child." "Do you not want this baby?" Eleanor's voice broke. Thomas was at her side instantly, kneeling before her. "I want it more than my next breath. I want to give you everything. A safe home, full pantry, a future. But wanting isn't enough. I'm failing you." "No," Eleanor pulled him close. "You're human. We both are, and we'll figure this out." But as days passed with no solutions appearing, the weight of their situation pressed down like the Montana winter that was fast approaching. Thomas grew quieter, working himself to exhaustion, trying to repair what he could with materials salvaged from the ruins. Eleanor stretched their meager supplies, making soup from bones she'd boiled twice already, darning clothes that were more patch than original fabric. The turning point came on a bitter October morning when Eleanor woke to find Thomas gone. A note on the table, written in his careful hand. "Gone to try something. Don't worry. Back by dark. I love you." The day crawled by like years. Eleanor tried to work, but her hands shook too badly. Where had he gone? What was he trying? Thomas returned at sunset, his face unreadable. Behind him rode an older man on a paint horse, Native American, Eleanor realized, with silver braiding his long black hair and a face carved by wisdom and weather. "Eleanor," Thomas said carefully, "this is Grey Wolf. He's a chief of the Crow tribe whose territory borders our land. He has a proposal." Grey Wolf dismounted with the grace of a much younger man. "Mrs. Reed, your husband tells me you face difficult times. He also tells me you both fought with honor against those who tried to burn your home. This interests me." Eleanor glanced at Thomas, confused, but nodded respectfully. "We did what we had to do." "Exactly so." Grey Wolf's English was perfect, his eyes sharp. "For 3 years, my people have had trouble with white trappers crossing our boundaries, stealing game, leaving traps that kill horses. We have tried speaking to the territorial marshal, but he does not care about Indian complaints. We need allies who understand justice is not just for white men." Thomas stepped forward. "Grey Wolf is offering a trade. If we help mediate disputes between his tribe and the white trappers, if we use our position as homesteaders to give his people's grievances legitimacy with the authorities, his tribe will help us rebuild. Lumber from their forest lands, labor from his young men, food to see us through winter." Eleanor's mind raced. This could solve everything, but the social cost would be devastating. If people in town won't sell to us now, they'll completely ostracize us if we ally with the Crow. They already think we're troublemakers. This would make us traitors in their eyes. "Yes," Grey Wolf said simply. "This is why I offer trade, not charity. It will cost you socially what it costs us materially. Equal sacrifice, equal benefit, and perhaps, together, we build something better than what exists now." Eleanor looked at Thomas. His expression was open, waiting for her decision, not making it for her, trusting her judgment. That trust decided her. "We accept," Eleanor said, extending her hand to Grey Wolf. "With one condition. We work alongside your people. This is a partnership, not us accepting charity while others do the labor." Grey Wolf's weathered face creased into a smile. "Your husband said you were strong. He did not say you were wise, too. We have an agreement." They shook hands, white woman, white man, Crow chief, and Eleanor felt the weight of judgment that would follow. But she also felt something else, hope. The next weeks transformed everything. True to his word, Grey Wolf arrived 3 days later with a dozen young Crow men, lumber, and supplies. What Eleanor hadn't expected was for half of them to bring their wives and children. "We work together, we eat together," Grey Wolf explained. "This is how my people build, not men separate from women, but families creating home." The cultural collision was immediate and profound. The Crow women, led by Grey Wolf's daughter Falling Star, looked at Eleanor's cooking methods with poorly concealed amusement. Eleanor watched them prepare meals using techniques she'd never imagined, combining wild plants she'd thought were weeds with game meat into dishes that made their meager flour-based meals seem like punishment. "You cook like you fear the food will fight back," Falling Star said on the 3rd day, not unkindly. "Here, I show you." Eleanor swallowed her pride and became a student. Falling Star taught her which roots were edible, how to preserve meat using smoke and salt in ways that made it last months, how to make pemmican, a mixture of dried meat, fat, and berries that was nutritious and portable. In exchange, Eleanor taught Falling Star to read English, something the younger woman was hungry to learn. "The white men's words on paper give them power," Falling Star explained. "If I can read their treaties, their laws, maybe I can protect my people from tricks." The men's work was equally revelatory. Thomas, who'd always worked alone, found himself learning construction techniques that made European methods seem wasteful. The Crow men showed him how to use every part of a tree, how to build structures that worked with the wind rather than against it, how to read the land in ways that made him see his own property with new eyes. Running Elk, a man about Thomas's age, became his closest companion. "You work hard but not smart," Running Elk observed one afternoon as Thomas struggled to lift a heavy beam alone. "White men always try to be strong enough to not need help. Crow men know there is strength in depending on each other." Thomas, his back aching, had to admit the wisdom in that. Together, he and Running Elk accomplished in hours what would have taken Thomas days alone. But the true education came in the evenings, when both groups gathered around fires and shared stories. Eleanor learned that Grey Wolf's tribe had been peaceful allies to early settlers, only to be betrayed repeatedly. Thomas heard how Running Elk's wife had died during a winter when promised government supplies never arrived. The Crow learned how Eleanor had been treated as property by her own father, how Thomas had lost his family to fire and grief. They discovered their struggles were different in specifics, but similar in essence. All of them fighting for dignity, for survival, for the right to live on land they loved, without someone trying to take it from them. "We are more alike than different," Grey Wolf said one night, his voice carrying the weight of years. "All trying to protect our families, all betrayed by men who value gold over honor. This is why we must stand together." The barn rose like a testament to that unity, stronger than before, built with combined knowledge and shared labor. But the cost Grey Wolf had warned about was already manifesting. The first incident came when Eleanor went to town for mail. She was walking out of the post office when 3 women from the church, women who'd been coolly polite before, blocked her path. "Mrs. Reed, Mrs. Blackwood," the cattle baron's sister-in-law said, her voice dripping venom, "we've heard disturbing reports. They say you're living with savages, letting them touch your property, eating with them." "They're helping us rebuild what your brother-in-law destroyed," Eleanor replied evenly. "They're Indians." Mrs. Blackwood said it like a curse. "Decent white women don't associate with their kind." The town council is considering whether homesteaders who collaborate with tribes should lose their claims. Eleanor felt rage bubble up, but forced it down. The town council can try. But Judge Morrison granted us this land legally, and we've broken no laws. Unless helping your neighbors is illegal now. Neighbors? Mrs. Blackwood laughed coldly. Those creatures aren't neighbors. They're obstacles to progress, and you and your husband are race traitors for aiding them. The words hit like physical blows, but Eleanor kept her head high. I'd rather be a traitor to your version of race than a traitor to basic human decency. Good day, ladies. She walked away trembling, but didn't let them see her cry until she was out of sight. Thomas faced worse. When he went to file their land improvement papers at the territorial office, the clerk, a man he'd known casually for months, refused to process them. Can't do it, Reed. Word is, you're housing hostiles on your property. That makes you a security risk. Hostiles? Thomas's voice was dangerously quiet. Those hostiles are peaceful people who've committed no crimes, unlike Marcus Blackwood, who's actually in jail for arson and assault. Or are white criminals less threatening than innocent Indians in your view? The clerk's face reddened. You keep talking like that, you'll find yourself with more problems than paperwork. There's talk of forming a committee. Homesteaders banding together to drive the Indians back to their reservation and dealing with white traders who enable them. Thomas leaned across the counter. You tell this committee that the Reeds will defend their property and their friends with every legal means available. And if they come at us illegally, they'll learn why I survived 5 years of war before I came to Montana. I've faced worse than a mob of cowards. He filed the papers with the territorial governor's office instead, going over the local clerk's head. But the threat was real and growing. The night he returned and told Eleanor about the brewing violence, she felt their fragile world tilting again. Maybe we should send them away, she said quietly. Keep them safe. No. Thomas's voice was firm. That's what men like Blackwood count on, that decent people will back down when threatened. Gray Wolf's people have been backing down for decades, and it's only made the predators bolder. We draw a line here. Eleanor placed his hand on her stomach, where the slight swell of early pregnancy was just beginning to show. Even with this? Even if it means our child grows up as an outcast? Thomas's expression softened but didn't waver. Especially because of this. What kind of world do we want to build for our baby? One where they learn to abandon friends when it's convenient? Or one where they learn that real wealth is measured in honor, not gold? Eleanor leaned into him. The judge ordered me to marry a poor man, but he gave me the richest heart on earth. You're right. We stand together. The confrontation came sooner than expected. 2 weeks before Christmas, a group of 15 men rode onto Reed property. Thomas spotted them from the new barn and immediately rang the warning bell. Gray Wolf and his people emerged from various work sites, and Eleanor came running from the cabin, rifle in hand. By the time the riders reached the yard, they faced a united front. 8 Crow men, 4 Crow women, Thomas and Eleanor, all armed and positioned strategically. The leader was Frank Morrison, a local rancher Eleanor vaguely recognized. Not a bad man, she'd thought. I don't recall voting for any such committee, Thomas replied, his rifle held casually but ready. And I don't see any badges, which means you're a mob on private property, and the law says I can defend it. Don't get legal with us, another rider shouted. You're harboring Indians. They don't belong here. Gray Wolf stepped forward, and Eleanor saw the dignity in his bearing, the bearing of a leader who'd negotiated with generals and governors. This land was Crow territory long before your grandfathers were born. We have more right to belong here than you do. But we do not speak of rights and belongings. We speak of friendship and mutual aid. This is something you cannot understand. We understand you're trying to keep your foothold so you can raid our cattle, Morrison said, though he looked uncomfortable. History shows white men made promises to my people and broke every one, Gray Wolf interrupted, his voice sharp as winter wind. We were promised land, then driven from it. Promised food, then starved. Promised peace, then hunted. Do not speak to me of what history shows when you are too coward to read all its pages. Several riders shifted uneasily. Eleanor realized that not all of them were fully committed to this confrontation. There was an opening here. Mr. Morrison, Eleanor called out, stepping forward despite Thomas's warning hand on her arm. Your wife had difficult labor with your youngest son 3 years ago. My mother, before she died, was the midwife who saved both their lives. Did Mrs. Morrison deserve that help? Morrison's jaw tightened. Of course she did. Why? Because she's white? Because she's a homesteader's wife? Eleanor let the questions hang. Or because she was a human being in distress, and decent people help those in need regardless of race. She gestured to the rebuilt barn, the repaired fences, the restored property. These people helped us when your committee of good Christian homesteaders refused to sell us nails, when the bank wouldn't give us loans, when the town decided we weren't worth their time because we'd been attacked by a wealthy criminal. The Crow showed us more Christian charity than your church ever did. That's different, Morrison protested weakly. How? Thomas stepped beside Eleanor. My wife is pregnant. If she has trouble in childbirth, will your committee help? Or will you let her die because we befriended the wrong people? The question hung in the cold air like a sword. Eleanor saw several men exchange glances. Pregnant women were sacred in frontier culture. Every settler knew how many mothers and babies died in this harsh land. Thomas had invoked the one thing that might pierce their hardened hearts. One of the younger riders spoke up. Frank, my ma always said turning away from folks in need brings bad luck. And Mrs. Reed's got a point. We didn't help them when Blackwood burned them out. Because Blackwood's family has money, another man added, as if realizing it for the first time. We were scared of crossing him. That's the truth of it. Morrison's shoulders sagged. We're not trying to be cruel. We're trying to protect our families. The territorial governor's been talking about relocating all the tribes further west. If we're seen cooperating with Indians, we could lose our own standing. So you'd sacrifice your honor to keep your standing? Thomas's voice was quiet, but cut deep. I've been a poor man all my life, Morrison. Lost everything once, almost lost it again. But I learned something important. When you have nothing material, all you have is your word and your principles. That's the real wealth. That's what makes a man rich or poor. He gestured to Grey Wolf and his people. These men have helped me rebuild. Their women have taught my wife survival skills that might save her life and our child's life. They've asked nothing except that we speak truth about them to authorities, that we testify they're peaceful, that we advocate for fair treatment. If that makes us traitors in your eyes, then we're proud traitors. Eleanor stepped forward again, her voice ringing clear. The judge ordered me to marry a poor man, and I did. Poor in gold, but rich in everything that matters. Rich in courage, rich in principle, rich in honor. If you men want to be truly rich, you'll leave here now and think about what kind of men you want to be. The kind who threaten pregnant women and peaceful people, or the kind who stand up for what's right, even when it's hard. The silence stretched long enough that Eleanor heard a hawk cry in the distance. Then Morrison slowly dismounted. The other men tensed, hands moving toward weapons, but Morrison raised his hand. My wife would skin me alive if she knew I'd threatened a pregnant woman, he said quietly. He looked at Grey Wolf. My grandfather fought in Indian wars. He taught me to hate your people. But he also taught me to respect courage. And you've got courage, standing there outnumbered but not backing down. He turned to his riders. Boys, I think we made a mistake today. Frank? One of the others protested. No. Morrison's voice was firm. We've been listening to scared men talking in saloons, working ourselves up into a mob. That's not who we are. That's not who I want to be. He looked at Thomas and Eleanor. We're not friends. I won't lie about that. But we're not your enemies either. What you do on your property is your business, long as you're not breaking laws. And I don't see any laws being broken here." He remounted, tipped his hat to Eleanor, a gesture of respect that felt like a victory, and turned his horse. One by one, the others followed. Not all of them looked happy about it, but they followed. When the dust settled and the riders disappeared, Eleanor's knees nearly buckled. Thomas caught her, and Grey Wolf laid a hand on his shoulder, a gesture of brotherhood that needed no words. "You fought well with words," Running Elk said, approaching with a grin. "Better than with guns. No bloodshed, but great victory." Falling Star hugged Eleanor carefully. "Your baby will be strong like you, brave like father, wise like mother." That night, both communities celebrated together with a feast that stretched late into the evening. Eleanor sat beside Thomas, watching crow children play with their dog, listening to Running Elk teach Thomas a song in his language. Feeling her baby move for the first time, a flutter like butterfly wings. "What are you thinking?" Thomas asked quietly. "That we're building something new here," Eleanor replied. "Not just a barn or a house, but a different way of living, where people judge each other by character instead of skin color, where wealth is measured in friendship instead of gold." She turned to him. "The judge ordered me to marry a poor man, but every day I discover new ways you've made me rich." Thomas kissed her forehead. "Then we're both wealthy, beyond measure." As winter settled over Montana, the Reed Ranch became something unprecedented, a place where two cultures worked side by side, learning from each other, building something that existed nowhere else in the territory. It wasn't easy. There were misunderstandings, cultural clashes, moments of frustration on both sides. But they persisted, together. The true test of their alliance came with the spring thaw. Eleanor was 7 months pregnant when territorial soldiers arrived at Grey Wolf's encampment with relocation orders. The tribe was to move 200 miles west to a new reservation, leaving immediately. Grey Wolf rode to the Reed Ranch at dawn, his face grave. "The soldiers say we have 1 week. They will use force if we resist." "On what grounds?" Thomas demanded. "On the grounds that the white government has decided they want this land for railroad expansion." Grey Wolf's voice was bitter. "Always there are new reasons. Always the reasons are lies covering greed." Eleanor felt the baby kick hard, as if responding to her spike of anger. "This is wrong. Those treaties mean nothing when men want what we have," Falling Star said quietly. She'd become Eleanor's closest friend over the winter, teaching her not just survival skills, but the crow language, stories, ways of seeing the world. The thought of losing her felt like losing a sister. Thomas paced, his mind clearly working through options. "What if we testified before the territorial governor? We're white homesteaders. They might listen to us about your people being peaceful, productive." "They will not listen," Grey Wolf said simply. "They never listen. We have learned this over many broken promises." He looked at Eleanor, at her swollen belly, and something softened in his weathered face. "You have done more for my people than any white person in my lifetime. You stood with us when it cost you. We will remember this always, but we cannot ask you to sacrifice more." "You're not asking," Eleanor said fiercely. "We're offering. Thomas is right. We have to try legal channels first. And if those fail..." "If those fail," Thomas finished, his voice hard, "then we find another way. You saved us. We won't abandon you now." The next 3 days were a whirlwind of desperate action. Thomas rode to Helena to file formal protests with the territorial government. Eleanor, despite her pregnancy, wrote letters to every authority she could think of: the governor, territorial judges, even Eastern newspapers she'd heard covered Indian affairs. But bureaucracy moved slower than soldiers' orders. On the 5th day, a young lieutenant arrived at the Reed Ranch with a squad of 10 men. He was barely 20, his uniform still stiff with newness, his eyes uncomfortable with the duty assigned to him. "Mr. and Mrs. Reed, I'm Lieutenant James Porter. I'm here to inquire about your relationship with the Crow tribe camped on adjacent land." "They're our friends and allies," Thomas said flatly. "They're peaceful people who've broken no laws." Porter shifted uncomfortably. "Be that as it may, are in violation of federal relocation orders. I've been instructed to ask if you've been coerced or threatened into harboring them. If you have, we can provide protection." "The only threat we've faced came from white settlers and criminals," Eleanor interrupted. "Grey Wolf's people saved our lives and our land. We're not harboring them. We're standing with them." "Ma'am, I appreciate the sentiment, but—" "No, you don't." Eleanor's voice cracked like a whip, and Porter flinched. Appreciating would mean doing something about it. You're just following orders, which is what every person says when they're participating in something they know is wrong. Porter's young face reddened. "Ma'am, I don't make policy. I'm a soldier." "My husband was a soldier," Eleanor shot back. "He learned the difference between lawful orders and immoral ones. Which is this?" The lieutenant opened his mouth, closed it, opened it again. "Mrs. Reed, I personally think the relocation is harsh, but it's not my decision." "Then whose decision is it?" Thomas stepped forward. "Give me a name. Give me someone to appeal to." "Colonel Hargrove out of Fort Benton is overseeing the operation," Porter admitted. "But he's just implementing federal policy." "Then we'll go to Fort Benton," Thomas decided immediately. "Eleanor, you're staying here." "Like hell I am." Eleanor's hand went to her pregnant belly. A pregnant woman gets doors opened that stay closed to men. "This baby and I are going to Fort Benton." Thomas looked like he wanted to argue, but he knew that determined set to her jaw. "It's 3 days hard riding." "Then we better leave soon." They arrived at Fort Benton 2 days later, Eleanor exhausted but resolute. Getting an audience with Colonel Hargrove took another full day of persistent demands, and Eleanor weaponizing her pregnancy. Soldiers were hardened men, but even they blanched at keeping a heavily pregnant woman waiting in the sun. Hargrove was a career military man in his 50s, his face weathered, his eyes tired. He looked at Eleanor's condition and immediately ordered chairs brought. "Mrs. Reed, in your condition, you shouldn't have made this journey. Whatever your concerns, our concerns are that you're about to relocate a peaceful tribe based on lies," Eleanor said bluntly, "and we're here to testify otherwise." Over the next hour, they laid out everything. How Grey Wolf's people had helped them, the alliance they'd built, the incident with the Homesteader Committee that had ended peacefully because of the Crow's restraint and wisdom. Thomas presented letters from Judge Morrison and 3 other homesteaders who'd had second thoughts and were willing to vouch for the Crow's peaceful nature. Hargrove listened, his expression unreadable. When they finished, he was quiet for a long moment. "What you're describing is admirable," he finally said. "Truly. But here's what you don't understand. This relocation isn't about whether Grey Wolf's tribe is peaceful. It's about railroad expansion. The Northern Pacific wants to run a line through that territory. They have contracts. They have government backing. They have money. He looked at them with something like pity. And you have what? Testimony? Good intentions? We have the law, Thomas said. Treaties were signed. Treaties get renegotiated when circumstances change, Hargrove interrupted. You're both young enough to still believe the world runs on justice. It doesn't. It runs on power and money, and the railroad has both. Eleanor felt tears of frustration sting her eyes. So there's nothing? We came all this way for nothing? Hargrove's expression shifted slightly. I didn't say that. He stood, walked to his window overlooking the parade ground. I've been a soldier for 30 years. I've done things I'm proud of, and things that keep me awake at night. Following orders to relocate peaceful tribes, that's in the second category. He turned back to them. I can delay the operation, 2 weeks, maybe 3, while I request clarification on certain treaty provisions. That gives you time to raise hell with the territorial governor, newspapers, anyone who'll listen. But Mrs. Reed? He looked directly at Eleanor. In 3 weeks, you need to be home, not fighting bureaucrats. I can, Eleanor started. No, you can't. Hargrove's voice was firm, but not unkind. You've done what you can. Now you need to let others carry the fight, while you focus on bringing that baby safely into the world. Your husband can continue the battle. Eleanor wanted to protest, but the exhaustion of the journey was catching up to her. The baby was moving constantly now, pressing on her bladder, her ribs, reminding her that 2 lives depended on her choices. 3 weeks, Thomas said. We'll use every day. They left Fort Benton with a scrap of hope and a ticking clock. Thomas returned Eleanor to the ranch, then immediately rode for Helena to meet with the territorial governor. Eleanor, despite her frustration at being sidelined, knew Hargrove was right. She was in no condition for more hard travel. But that didn't mean she was helpless. Eleanor spent the next 2 weeks writing letters to Eastern newspapers, to missionary societies, to anyone with influence she could identify. Falling Star and the other Crow women helped, sharing their stories, their histories, their pain. Eleanor transformed their words into ammunition against the relocation. One letter reached a reporter at the New York Tribune who'd been covering Western expansion with a critical eye. He published Eleanor's account under the headline, Pregnant Homesteader Defends Indians While Territory Breaks Treaties. The article was reprinted in a dozen papers. Another letter reached a senator's wife who'd been active in reform movements. She began asking uncomfortable questions in Washington parlors. The pressure built slowly, but it built. Thomas returned after 10 days, exhausted but energized. The territorial governor is requesting a federal review of the relocation order. It's not a victory, but it's not a loss either. The soldiers have been ordered to hold position while the review happens. How long will that take? Eleanor asked. Weeks, maybe months. Thomas pulled her carefully into his arms. We bought time, maybe enough time for the truth to matter. That night, Eleanor woke to familiar tightening across her belly. Not the first time. Braxton Hicks contractions, Falling Star had called them. The body practicing for the real thing. But these felt different, stronger. Thomas, she whispered. I think it's time. Thomas was on his feet instantly, building up the fire, heating water. His hands shaking slightly with fear he was trying to hide. It's too early. You're not due for another 3 weeks. Tell that to the baby. Eleanor gasped as another contraction hit. Within an hour, the cabin was full of Crow women. Falling Star took charge with a calm authority that steadied everyone. Grey Wolf's wife, Morning Sky, set up the birthing area with practiced efficiency. Even Thomas was given specific tasks to keep his panic channeled productively. The labor was long and difficult. Eleanor had known childbirth was hard, but the reality exceeded her worst imaginings. Pain that felt like her body was tearing apart, hours that stretched into eternity, moments where she thought she couldn't endure another second. "You are strong," Falling Star kept saying, her voice an anchor in the chaos. "Stronger than you know. The baby needs you to be strong just a little longer." "I can't," Eleanor sobbed. "You can." Falling Star's grip on her hand was fierce. "You faced your father. You faced Blackwood. You faced soldiers and bureaucrats. One small baby cannot defeat you." The reminder of everything she'd overcome gave Eleanor strength she didn't know she had left. When Morning Sky finally said, "Push now," Eleanor bore down with everything she had. Her daughter entered the world screaming her fury at being evicted from her warm home, and Eleanor collapsed back against Thomas, who was crying unashamedly. "A girl," Thomas kept saying. "We have a daughter." Falling Star cleaned the baby with gentle hands, wrapped her in soft cloth, and placed her on Eleanor's chest. The tiny face was red and wrinkled and absolutely perfect. "What will you name her?" Morning Sky asked. Eleanor looked at Thomas, and understanding passed between them. "Hope," Eleanor said. "Her name is Hope Reed, because hope was what had sustained them through everything. Hope that people could change. Hope that justice might prevail. Hope that love was stronger than hate." Little Hope Reed fell asleep against her mother's breast, innocent of the battles being fought around her, unaware that she'd been born into a world being rebuilt with courage and alliance. 3 weeks later, a telegram arrived at the Reed Ranch. Thomas read it twice to be sure he understood correctly, then ran to find Eleanor, who was nursing Hope on the porch. "The review came back," he said, his voice shaking. "The relocation order has been suspended indefinitely. They're citing treaty violations and public pressure. Grey Wolf's people can stay." Eleanor felt tears stream down her face. "We did it!" "You did it," Thomas corrected, kneeling beside her. "Those letters you wrote, the story you told, they mattered. Truth mattered." That evening, both communities gathered for a celebration that lasted until dawn. Grey Wolf held baby Hope with the tenderness of a grandfather, blessing her in Crow and English. "This child," he said, "is a bridge between worlds. Born to parents who chose honor over ease, who chose unity over division. She will grow up knowing both peoples as family. That is a great gift." Eleanor, exhausted but deeply happy, leaned against Thomas as stars wheeled overhead. "The judge ordered me to marry a poor man," she whispered. "And he gave you the richest heart on earth," Thomas finished, his arms around both his wife and daughter. "But you made us all rich. You taught me that wealth isn't what you own, it's what you stand for, what you protect, who you love." "Together," Eleanor said, the word that had become their foundation. "Together," Thomas echoed, and little Hope, sleeping between them, would grow up knowing that some of the richest people in the world were those who measured their wealth in courage, in friendship, in love, and in the choice to stand for what was right, even when the cost seemed too high. The barn stood strong. The land thrived. 2 communities lived side by side. Not perfectly. There were still tensions, still challenges, still moments of misunderstanding. But they persisted, together, because the judge had ordered Eleanor to marry a poor man, And Thomas Reed had given her not just the richest heart on earth, but had shown her that true wealth was something they could build together. One act of courage, one choice for justice, one moment of love at a time. The barn was rebuilt by autumn, stronger than before. Neighbors who'd heard about their stand against Blackwood came to help, and Thomas's reputation as a man of principle spread. The cattle baron was sentenced to 2 years for arson and assault. Eleanor's father lost his standing in the community and left Montana in disgrace. On their first anniversary, Thomas took Eleanor's hand as they stood watching the sunset paint their land in shades of amber and rose. "I have something for you," he said, pulling out a small wooden box he'd carved himself. Inside was a simple ring, not gold or silver, but made from a piece of the first tree they'd planted together, polished until it gleamed. "The judge ordered you to marry a poor man," Thomas said, sliding it onto her finger. "But every day since, I've tried to give you the richest heart on earth. One that's completely, eternally yours." Eleanor threw her arms around him, laughing and crying at once. "You succeeded, and you gave me something even more valuable. You taught me that poverty is measured in kindness, and I'm the wealthiest woman alive." They kissed as the sun dipped below the mountains, two people who'd been sentenced to each other and discovered they'd been set free. 5 years later, the Reed Ranch was thriving, modest but prosperous, with 3 horses, a growing herd, and a reputation for treating everyone fairly. Eleanor had become known throughout the territory as a woman you didn't cross, while Thomas was respected as a man whose word was iron. Their daughter, Hope, had her mother's determination and her father's steady strength. Their son, Samuel, born 2 years after Hope, had inherited both parents' fierce sense of justice. The children grew up speaking both English and Crow, playing with children from both communities, learning that family was defined by love and loyalty rather than blood or race. And when Eleanor tucked them into bed each night in the solid home they'd built together, she'd sometimes tell them the story of how a judge's order became the greatest blessing of her life. "Was Daddy really poor?" Hope would ask. "In money, yes," Eleanor would answer, "but in everything that mattered, honor, kindness, courage, love. He was the richest man I'd ever met, and he made me rich too, in all the ways that last forever." Thomas would appear in the doorway, and Eleanor's heart would swell with the same fierce love she'd felt that first night he'd told her she was a person worth dignity. The judge had ordered her to marry a poor man, but Thomas Reed had given her the richest heart on earth, and together they'd built a kingdom that no amount of gold could buy. A kingdom where justice mattered more than profit, where friendship crossed all boundaries, where courage was measured in standing up rather than in standing apart. Grey Wolf, now elderly but still sharp-minded, often visited to share wisdom with the children. "Your parents," he would tell them, "showed that the greatest wealth is in choosing what is right over what is easy. Remember this always." And they did. Thank you so much for listening to this story. I'd love to know where you're enjoying this tale from. Are you listening at home, during your commute, or perhaps while working? Please subscribe to the From Wild West channel and share your thoughts in the comments below. What did you think of Eleanor and Thomas's journey? Your feedback means the world to us. The barn was rebuilt by autumn, stronger than before. Neighbors who'd heard about their stand against Blackwood came to help, and Thomas's reputation as a man of principle spread. The cattle baron was sentenced to 2 years for arson and assault. Eleanor's father lost his standing in the community and left Montana in disgrace. On their first anniversary, Thomas took Eleanor's hand as they stood watching the sunset paint their land in shades of amber and rose. "I have something for you," he said, pulling out a small wooden box he'd carved himself. Inside was a simple ring, not gold or silver, but made from a piece of the first tree they'd planted together, polished until it gleamed. "The judge ordered you to marry a poor man," Thomas said, sliding it onto her finger. "But every day since, I've tried to give you the richest heart on earth, one that's completely, eternally yours." Eleanor threw her arms around him, laughing and crying at once. "You succeeded, and you gave me something even more valuable. You taught me that poverty is measured in kindness, and I'm the wealthiest woman alive." They kissed as the sun dipped below the mountains, two people who'd been sentenced to each other and discovered they'd been set free. 5 years later, the Reed Ranch was thriving, modest but prosperous, with 3 horses, a growing herd, and a reputation for treating everyone fairly. Eleanor had become known throughout the territory as a woman you didn't cross, while Thomas was respected as a man whose word was iron. Their daughter, Sarah, had her mother's determination and her father's steady strength. And when Eleanor tucked her into bed each night in the solid home they'd built together, she'd tell her the story of how a judge's order became the greatest blessing of her life. "Was Daddy really poor?" Sarah would ask. "In money, yes," Eleanor would answer, "but in everything that mattered, honor, kindness, courage, love, he was the richest man I'd ever met. And he made me rich too, in all the ways that last forever." Thomas would appear in the doorway, their second child, a boy, asleep in his arms, and Eleanor's heart would swell with the same fierce love she'd felt that first night he'd told her she was a person worth dignity. The judge had ordered her to marry a poor man, but Thomas Reed had given her the richest heart on earth, and together they'd built a kingdom that no amount of gold could buy. Thank you so much for listening to this story. I'd love to know where you're enjoying this tale from. Are you listening at home, during your commute, or perhaps while working? Please subscribe to the From Wild West channel and share your thoughts in the comments below. What did you think of Eleanor and Thomas's journey? Your feedback means the world to us.